And I do assure you also that when they lie down and look at the Milky Way, they have comparable experiences, but I think that they have an experience which goes a bit deeper and goes a bit further about what they see. And that experience is summed up in the last line of perhaps the greatest poem ever written, Dante's Divine Comedy, when he speaks of the love which moves the sun and the other stars. And that is the case which we feel is consistently misrepresented, and the case which, if the atheist fundamentalists had the intellectual honesty which they say they did, they would listen to that with more respect rather than traducing it.
Thank you. A.C. Grayling, summing up against the motion.
Well, Charles Moore reminds us, and I mentioned this in my opening comments, that a standard charge laid against people who don't have a religious outlook is that they don't understand the religious outlook, that we don't appreciate how it feels to be religious and to have that way of looking at things. And I pointed out that the great majority of people who don't have a religious outlook used to have one. Most atheists are people who have won through to an open-minded, free-thinking way of looking at the world from having been brought up in one or another religion, their parents' religion usually, and had it inculcated into them when they were very young. Of course, there is great evolutionary advantage for children to be extremely credulous. That's why children believe in Father Christmas, the Tooth Fairy, God, anything that the adults tell them with a serious expression on their faces. By the time they get to 11 or 12, they've lost their belief in tooth fairies and Father Christmas, but social reinforcement of religious belief is massive and pervasive, and that's why religious belief persists. So most people, almost everybody, more than 90% I would guess, do know what it's like to sit in church or synagogue or temple and to have be in that ambience. So we do understand it, and it may very well be that we understand it all too well. It's not that we don't understand it, we understand it all too well, which is why we disagree with it. That's point number one. And point number two, Charles and others say what we should try to make some sense of the inner meaning, the inner workings of a religious outlook. The problem is this, that religion, for somebody who is critical of its premises, is in the same sort of position as astrology. Now, astrology bases itself on the idea that what we can see from the planet Earth in the way of heavenly bodies has an influence on our character and our destiny. Once you've come to the conclusion that that just ain't so, then there's no point in getting involved in all the complexities of the different astrological theories. Once you've come to the view that this is just an untenable position, no point in going into all the things that Charles Moore says we should get into in trying to understand that the internal feeling of that position. Fact is that rejecting a certain view, rejecting a certain way of looking at the world entails nothing further other than a responsibility to begin to think carefully about what you do think and why, how you would make a good, responsible case for that, and how you would live responsibly and well in a world where it is our job as human beings to make the best fist we can of our endowment in nature.
A.C. Grayling, thank you very much indeed.
I'd just take the opportunity, if I may, to address the last question, which was asked from the audience, about whether Charles and myself are not really on the defensive on this issue now. And strangely, I think I would want to admit that in a sense we are, because on the one hand, we're battling against creationist religious fundamentalists, and on the other hand, against the new atheists. And I've suggested at the beginning the sense in which they feed each other, and it's therefore very, very difficult to get across the case for classical Christian thought in the Western tradition. And if I might say so, I think Anthony slipped into that again earlier on, where he put together not believing in fairies and not believing in what he called deities. But in that sense, the early Christians, as I said earlier, were atheists. They didn't believe in deities. They believed in the God of classical Western theism, who is not an existent in the world of existence, not a thing in the world of things, but the ground and goal of all existence, in whom all things exist. John of Damascus in the 8th century, and no doubt I might be scorned for quoting somebody such a long time ago, but John of Damascus in the 8th century, great bastion of Christian Orthodoxy in the East, said, what God is in himself is totally incomprehensible and unknowable. And it's that sense of the mystery of God. We can use words about God and deity and deities, but in the end we're talking about something which is beyond human words. And I think it's that sense of mystery which both religious fundamentalism and the new atheism somehow fail to point to in any way.
Thank And in just 10 words each, if God didn't create the universe, why are we here?
We find ourselves here, and I would agree with the other two that if we find ourselves here, we should assume responsibility for our lives and exult in the good things and do what we can to remedy the evil things.
Slightly more than 10 words, but very clear.
I don't see why this is a question I have to answer. It's not my problem.
Not Charles Moore's problem. If God didn't create the universe, who did, gentlemen?
Oh, that you've changed the question, and that if I may say, is a silly question. The question you first asked is if the universe wasn't created by a supernatural agency of some kind, then what are we doing here? My answer is we're here to create meaning and to take care of one another.
Thank you very much. You could be nice to me later. Richard Dawkins.
If God didn't create the universe, who did? In a way, that's the whole point. That smuggling in of that word who is begging that huge question. Nobody created it, and if you try to postulate something like a God who did, then you've opened up an even larger question than the one you've solved. To answer the question of how did the universe come about by saying it was created by a God is to create a bigger question. It's to provide no answer at all. It's a non-answer.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I think we've had an absolutely marvellous debate, superb questions from the floor, and